Right, see if we get a few joining. Never done a YouTube live before. So just wait for a few to join. What we're going to be doing is a new series, if you like. Not really a series. I'm going to be going live just for an hour or so every fortnight, trying to answer some of your questions, do a Q&A. There we go, just starting to get a few people coming live. We'll just give it a minute or two, let a few join. Yeah, I'm going to do a Q&A, probably fortnightly, something like that. I'm not going to do massively long ones because people haven't got time to watch 2-3 hour streams. So try and keep it where, you know, there's just literally an hour of Q&As, solid Q&As, get down to business. And there we go, evening starts. Right, so I can see the comments, that's good. Pretty similar to Facebook, I think. Hello, Michael, Macca, Peg Pinter, Ian McNamara, Macca1 on here, are you? Evening, Ant. Yeah, so we're going to do a Q&A. So if you want to fire some questions over, I'll get them answered. All right, Andy, all right, Andre, sorry, Carp, sorry, Macca. Fire some questions over. I'm going to start off with a question I got on Facebook, so I don't think he's got, bloody hell, some comments come through here quick. I don't think some people have a YouTube account. So one of the questions I actually got asked on Facebook from Tim Clegg was, when do you start dobbing, or where do you start dobbing, and when would you look to feed in the winter? So obviously this morning, coldest day of the year by far, -3, -4. The van was absolutely froze solid. The lakes have actually started to freeze for the first time this year. It's that time of year now where fish will start to ball up. So 2 weeks ago, you probably move your plummet around your peg, drag it through your peg, you won't feel a single fish. Now you'll start feeling balls of fish. Them fish obviously don't want to feed. You've got to dob them. You can't really make them feed. They might feed later in the day when the light starts to go, but when it's really, really cold, trying to catch fish feeding when they don't want to feed, whether you like it or not, they just won't feed. So you've got to dob them. So where do you start dobbing? Now, it's all venue dependent. And what I mean by that is if you've got a lake, so my typical lake, I know Tim goes to Partridge, so he asked me about Partridge. Partridge is your typical snake lake. You've got 2.5 foot in the edge, 5 foot down the middle, 2.5 foot across. Andy, would you dob for skimmers in winter? No, Barry, I wouldn't ever dob for skimmers. I'd probably only ever dob for carp and F1s, really. But going back to what I was just saying, on Partridge, you've got like a predominant shelf where it's 2.5 foot across, 5 foot in the middle, 2.5 foot on the far bank. Now, you can't fit a massive ball of fish in 2.5 foot. You know, it's just, there's limited space. Let's say a fish is, 2 fish takes up a foot square. And if you've got 2.5 foot, basically the water's clear, so they ain't going to sit right near the surface. So you can sort of rule out the first 10 inches. And then you've only sort of got 20 inches of water left. So there's nowhere for the fish to sort of sit. So what they like to do when you've got a predominant shelf and a deep track like that is sit down the middle. So you can actually dob fish down the middle. And you might think, well, you're sort of like in open water there. You're not really, you know, it doesn't make sense. But what the fish like to do is sit sort of 3 foot deep. So if it's 2.5 foot shelf, they don't feel safe sat on top of it. So they actually sit in the deep water down the middle, and F1s in particular will shoal up in big balls and they'll sit down the track, and you can actually dob them like 3 foot deep in 5 foot. Now sometimes you can actually dob them as well right down the middle of the canal, out of your peg, fishing left or right or whatever. But one thing in particular they like to do is sit against the far shelf. Now, when you're looking at it, you might be fishing 2/3 of the way across, off the bottom, 3 foot deep in like 5 foot. It doesn't really make sense, but when you think about it, you've got this shelf on the far bank and they'll just use it to swim along, and that's like their cover. So it's an underwater feature. It's a bit like a sunken bar, if you like. When that rule doesn't apply is when you get a venue that might be the same depth all the way across. So places like Herringbrook, where it might be 5 foot down the middle and 4 foot across, because it's 4 foot across touching the cover, you know, you will get a lot of fish that'll sit tight to the cover because they've got the space to sit there. You can fit a lot of fish in 4 foot. They can shoal up, and obviously, why would they sit down the middle when they can sit in a very similar depth across to some cover? So, where you choose to dob depends on the makeup of the lakes. I'll use Westwood for an example. If you've ever fished a Skylark Lake, some pegs are 18 inches deep, some pegs might be 4 or 5 foot deep around the areas. The best dobbing pegs are the ones with a depth, so you know, peg 30 where it's like 5 foot deep, for example, down the middle. And that's because the fish can sit in balls there. When it's 18 inches deep, you don't really dob lots of fish in that depth because every time you catch a fish, what tends to happen is the fish spook. So you hook a fish and they all spook out your peg. You scatter the shoal basically. So what you want to be doing is using, if you can't find cover across where you got a nice depth, don't be afraid of dobbing sort of in open water and using the underwater features, i.e. the shelves. And you don't always catch them on the far shelf. Sometimes you can catch them on canals where there's like bends or in a corner. You can catch them, you know, long down the bends, long into the corners, anything like that. An outer bend where it sort of curves away from you, if you like, rather than pointing at you. They're really good areas for fish to patrol along. And it's no different from sort of summer mugging. You know, summer, you'll see nothing. You'll get there in the morning, you won't see any fish. All of a sudden, the fish will pop up and they'll be on the surface. They do exactly the same in the winter. The only difference is you can't see them. So in winter, they might sit like 3 foot deep. John Ferris, how would you feed for skimmers? I'll come on to that, mate. If you're, so what I was saying there, lost track now, John. What was I going to say? Totally put me off there with that question. I was on about dobbing. If you was dobbing them down the slope, yeah, don't be put off by fishing down the slope. Oh yeah, I was talking about summer. So summer, when you're mugging them, it's exactly the same. You won't see them start with, and then they'll pop up to the surface, and all of a sudden you'll have loads of cruisers there, and you can even mug them or whatever. In the winter, it's exactly the same. The fish will sometimes sit like 3 foot deep when you've had a cold evening, and then as it warms up throughout the day, they'll come a little bit higher. So if you can't, if you catch in the morning when it's freezing after a frost in say 3 foot fishing in 5 foot of water, don't be surprised if the fish come up a little bit in the surface and they come to say 2 foot deep. You still can't see them, but when they're at 2 foot deep and they sit a little bit higher in the water, what will happen then is like midday, sometimes they'll drift onto the shelves. So all of a sudden you might catch a little bit tighter over or a bit more towards the cover. And then as it goes cold later in the day, that's probably when you would start to introduce a bit of bait because the fish will drop back into the track, and then normally you could catch, you know, fishing maggots down the middle and stuff like that, and hopefully try and catch some feeding fish later in the day. So hope that answers your question. Let's just see if I can find the comments on here now. So live chat visible. Right, here we go. Right, let me just, sorry about my finger on the screen. I'm going to start back at the top. So it's quite hard on this. Now then, I hope you're good. Has another tackle company ever tried to get you on board, and why didn't you go to them? Ryan Forest. Yeah, I've had loads of offers, mate, in the past, but I've never seen the need to leave Guru. Obviously, I knew the plans of Guru. I knew we had poles and rods and stuff like that coming. I was on board with TriCast before we brought our poles out because we didn't have poles and rods. But obviously that was a conflict of interest, so I had to leave them in the end. But yeah, I've had plenty of offers, mate, but to be honest, I'm happy where I am, and I can only see it getting bigger and better, so there's no real need to move. Let me just scroll back up. Captain No Muck's got Dudson. Hi Andy, where's Paul on? Like, I'm on Detty too. Not seen Paul for a bit, to be honest. Right, told it. Let's get the question in. Do you use fluorocarbon or mono hook lengths for winter silvers? The only time I would ever use fluorocarbon in winter is probably if I was feeder fishing, just because it's a little bit more stiffer. So if I was skimmer fishing, sometimes I might use monofilament, fluorocarbon over mono, just because it's a little bit stiffer, and I could fish like 012 fluorocarbon, whereas like 011, 013 N-gauge, sometimes it can twizzle up when you feeder fishing. It's just a little bit stiffer. But in terms of pole fishing, me personally, I'm not a big believer in, I'm not a big lover of fluorocarbon. There is a time and a place for it, especially in lighter lines, like probably 07, 09, things like that possibly. But for me, for my fishing, I'm a big believer that the fish want the line to be supple. The more supple it is, the easier they can suck it in. Fluorocarbon is obviously stiffer, so there's benefits to that. Your rig don't tangle, don't twizzle up, etc. It's a lot more durable. So if you say barbel fishing and fishing like Old 30, fluorocarbon is very abrasion resistant, very good for that. But personally, no, I use mono for pretty much 99.9% of my time. The only time I would ever use it, keep getting my finger in the way here, the only time I would ever use it is possibly on a feeder. But even then, most of my feed, I don't really do that much feeder fishing in the winter. And if I do, I just use Old 39 gauge. Hey up, Big Jack, David and Edwin. Do you use that one? Where can I get a white Aventus cap from? Andre. They don't actually sell the Aventus hats. We was gonna bring them out, but with the cost and everything, it ended up being too costly. And we just didn't think the public could pay for them. There was a real good quality cap. They are probably the best caps we've ever had, but they just ended up costing way too much, so we never actually brought them out. Sorry. Joe Farley. Hi Andy, in summer for carp, do you use 16 SMWGs or 18s as well? If so, what situations? So 16 SMWG, 18s SMWGs, that's pretty much all my carp hook lengths are. So I'll use 015, so I use SLWGs for all my small carp F1 fishing from 011 to 015, and that's in Ide. And then if I'm stepping up from that, I'm generally fishing for big carp. So 017, 019, very rare I'll use 022. 019 is probably my heaviest up length. So 017 and 019, I will have 18s and 16s SMWGs tied up on both, because it's more to suit the size of the bait. So I'm fishing 6mm pellets, I'll use an 18s SMWG. If I'm fishing an 8mm pellet, I'll use a 16s SMWG. And that's generally, keeps it simple and it's dead easy then. And then if I'm fishing for, say, banded caster or anything like that, I'm generally fishing for F1s, 4mm pellets, I'll use an 18s or a 16s SLWG. Do you think Christian Jones can get better? Only if I teach him, Tim. No, of course he'll get better. He's dedicated, he's bang on it. He'll probably be the next angling superstar in 10 years. Don't tell him I said that though. I'm just scrolling through. Sorry about my finger. I don't know how to get these comments up. Andy, would you dob for skimmers? No, I won't dob for skimmers. Barry. Hi Andy, hook length materials. What do you use and why? Mono or fluorocarbon? Does it make any difference? Like I just said, Richard, I use mono for pretty much all my all my hook lengths, pole and everything. I'm just a big believer in suppleness. I just think mono is a lot more supple than fluorocarbon. And if a fish goes to suck your bait and it doesn't move because it's too stiff, I believe you get more bites when it's more supple. That's why you get bites on lighter lines rather than thicker lines, just because it's more supple and the fish can suck it in easier. 011 is a lot more supple than say 022 or even 015. So you get more bites because it's easier for them to suck in. So, using a stiff line, there'd have to be a reason for it. Either you're fishing fast, say roach fishing or something like that on a feeder. Otherwise, I can't really see any point of it. Charlie Law, future Fishing Mania champ. He's got every possibility, mate, 100%. Very good little angler. Any plans of writing a book? I wouldn't know where to start, to be honest, and I don't know how much interest it would be. Maybe in the future, not yet. I think I need maybe in another 20 years. Micro pellets or ground bait for skimmers, 4 foot of water on the pole. It all depends whether they like ground bait or not. So like some venues I go to and I fish for skimmers, ground bait is really good. And then other venues, micro pellets is better. Like it depends. It totally depends whether they respond to ground bait or not. Personally, I would always feed a little bit of ground bait somewhere. And then if you was, so take Woodlands View for example, Woodlands Thirst where we used to go fishing. I used to always feed one line with micro pellets and one line with ground bait. And when we first went up there, micro pellets always seemed better than ground bait. You seemed to catch a better stamp of fish over it, and it just seemed to work better. But the more and more I fished it, it seemed to be better over ground bait. But the ground bait you choose is really important. So if I was fishing like that, I'd always go for a crushed expander ground bait, something that has not got any fish meal in. Like fish meal can be the reason why the fish will back off it. Nowadays, everywhere seems to like fish meal, to be fair, but crushed expander, it's not too strong, it's not too offensive. It's a real soft mix, like that can be really, really good. And I would feed a little bit of that. You can still put an odd micro in it. You can slop it up, make it stodgy, do whatever you want with it. Whereas with micro pellets, you're a little bit limited, and you generally end up with a lot of particles in your peg with micros. Whereas with ground bait, you can feed a little ball. There's loads of attraction, but not much food content. So I would say ground bait, but there is venues where micros are better. Let me just scroll back down. What is the perfect guru float for the margins? Darren Grace. The bagger, mate, that's just come out, literally. Not just saying that because it's named after me, but I designed that float for a float maker called Richie Wilson years and years ago. Probably used that style of float for about 10 years. Been begging Guru to do that pattern because it's literally the only float I use in 2 foot or less. If you was fishing deep margins, you could use something like a diamond. The problem with a diamond in really shallow water is the float's too long. So your float might be, say, 6 or 8 inches long. I've not measured it, but let's say it's 6 or 8 inches long. You're fishing in a shallow margin, 16 inches deep. Your float is taking up half of the marginal space, which means fish will brush into your float. You'll get bigger liners. You'll end up losing and foul looking more fish. So for me, we do a 0.3 and a 0.4 bagger, a little bulk. So you just want like 6 number 8s, sat on a hook length, so sat on top of the hook length knot. So my rig of a bagger would literally be, if I'm F1 carp fishing, it'd either be 017 or 019 main line, 0.4 bagger, 0.3 if you was fishing in like really shallow water and you weren't getting, if you weren't fishing for as many big fish, 0.3 is not as bad. But if I was fishing for big fish, you want that extra little bit of weight. So 0.4 is probably what I'd use for 90% of my fishing. So 0.4 bagger, you can fish that in literally 10 inches up to about 2 and a bit foot. Anything over 2 foot, and then you'd have to look for another pattern of float, maybe a bobby or something like that. But anything under 2 foot, and you're going to get fish, you're going to be washing your bait about and everything, you want a real stable float. 2mm bristle, again, that's really important. Fiberglass stem, so basically it doesn't break, it's really, really durable. I'm not a lover of fiberglass, but for that situation where you're bagging and catching a lot of big fish, you know, it's really important. For me, I would always choose wire or carbon, but there is a reason why that float has got fiberglass on. It's purely for strength. So fiberglass stem on it, and then I'd have a bulk of 6 number 8s, that's what a 0.4 takes, 5 number 8s for a 0.3, and then your hook length. If you was fishing in 2 foot for big carp, I'd probably use 4 inch. If I was fishing for F1s, it'd be a 3 inch, and that's pretty much it. Dead simple, you know, easiest rig you'll ever tie up. But that's pretty much the only float you need for like 2.5 foot and less. Let me just get a few more. The police outside. No, it's my Christmas lights. I'm actually in my front room because I've got my little dog next to me here. He's just asleep there. My missus has gone out, so if I go in my garage, they'll just bark their heads off all night. So they're just sleeping next to me. Just scroll back down. So many questions coming in, just trying to catch back up. Do you use hook length material? I've answered that one. What's the best float to use for dobbing bread? Now, I've always gone for a wire stem float with quite a thickish bristle, so like a 1.7mm bristle, but more and more now, I don't think the float really matters, as long as, with dobbing bread, it's all about, the only way you can get an extra bite is by your rig falling through slow. You're not feeding, you're not attracting the fish, it's all about location. So when it comes to picking your float, if it's not windy, you could actually use a real light carbon stem float, something like a 0.15 of a gram Wilkie Slim would be fine. But then if it's windy, that float is going to drift like mad. So then it's no good. Then you might want something like a 0.3 wire stem float. As long as you've got a nice bulk that's going to hold it in position, and two droppers. So my rig for bread would be 6-inch hook length, one number 12 dropper sat on top of that, another number 12 dropper sat on top of that, and then the weight above that, I don't really think it matters as long as your float is not drifting. So if it's flat calm, go for the lightest possible float so there's less resistance in your rig, even slower fall. But if it's windy or there's a bit of surface skim, the worst thing you want is your float moving along the surface like this. So make sure you backshot your rigs and make sure your float's heavy enough so that it's not getting pushed around by the wind. I don't think there's a perfect float for bread. You know, I've changed my opinion on this quite a bit. And I just think as long as you've got two number 12 droppers and your bread falls slowly, that's the only thing that's going to get you any more extra bites. But it has to stay still. So let's get these back up. Evening, Chris Millard. What is the perfect for margin? Do you think Paul has enough top two set up during a match? Paul's one of them who doesn't like to take any chances for sure. He will set everything up. He's basically like a true professional, really. Not like me. Andy, do you think your relaxed, laid-back demeanour is one of your biggest attributes? We all know someone who goes mad when fish falls off, and I've allowed to beat me a few times. You've never lost it. Yeah, like you can't change anything. Well, if you lose a fish or whatever, you're always, I lose fish every single match that I fish, but it's just part and parcel of it. Being able to stay calm under pressure as well, I think that comes with experience and time as well. The more matches you fish, especially when you're fishing in like big money finals and stuff like that, I think the more you do, the more you get used to the environment. And I think that applies to all sports, to be honest. There's brilliant snooker players, etc., who people say, he's banging in centuries for fun on the practice table, comes to the TVs and they can't play. So definitely, I think experience plays a big part of that. Plus, I'm quite laid back anyway, to be fair. Let me just get back down here. Do you use a spread out tapered shotting pattern in winter? Mark Jarvis. Yes, only for certain occasions. So basically I have 3 shotting patterns. I'd have a solid bulk, which I'd use in the summer. The downside to a solid bulk is the fish can feel all that resistance in one go. So if they're pulling at, say, 6 number 8s or 6 number 9s, whatever it may be, they've got to pull all that weight, in which they'll probably let go. It'll magnify your bite sometimes because they feel all the shot. But in the winter, I do like to take that 6 number 9s. So say I was fishing pellets in 3 foot or something like that. Instead of having a little bulk, like just sat above me up length, 4 inches away, I would fish a strung out bulk. So my shots would be like 1 inch apart, or they might be 2 inch, 2 inch, inch and a half, inch, half inch, half inch. So that's what your class is like tapered, where they move. The further away from the hook, the closer they get together, or the closer to the hook, the further they spread out. Tapered, strung bulk, whatever you want to call it, that's the sort of shotting pattern I would use for sort of like 3 foot and less. If I was fishing in deeper water though, no, I don't really like that. I just think it's prone to tangling. I would just use a bulk and 2 droppers. And the only difference I would have is if I wanted a slower fall, I would just basically fish a lighter float. I'm not a big believer in like stringing your rigs out for like shallow fishing and stuff like that, or really small fish on a canal fishing with like bread punch and stuff. Things like that, yes. But for F1s and carp fishing, I like to keep it dead positive. So bulk and 2 droppers, bulk and strung bulk, or strung tapered bulk, whatever you want to use. Just keep it simple. There's no secret shotting patterns. The advantage of having a strung bulk is less resistance. The fish are only going to feel one shot at a time. By the time it's registered on your float, they might have only dislodged one number 9. Whereas if you have a solid bulk, they've got to dislodge it all, in which you probably end up missing bites. So, what's the best elastic for winter F1 fishing? I've always used hydro elastic. I just use yellow, pink, orange if I'm fishing for, say, some big F1s and an odd big carp, odd decent sized carp. But if you're talking just F1s, you can't really go wrong with yellow and pink. Yellow and pink, you can fish old 10 to a 20s F1 maggot, 20s F1 pellet. You know you're not going to get broke. The problem when you start going to orange hydro or heavier is, you know, them little small hooks with fine wires and old 10 up lengths. You put a certain amount of pressure on them, they will bend or snap your hook length. So you've got to have your kit balanced. So pink, you know, it's almost impossible. When I'm fishing for silvers, I could net 10, 12 pound carp. I can pull like mad because my kit's balanced. You're never going to get broke. Whereas if I had white hydro to old 10, first time it ran, it'd probably snap me up length. So it's all about balancing your kit. If you're fishing for slightly bigger fish, orange is a brilliant elastic, probably my favourite hydro ever. But it's probably a little bit too harsh in the winter. I'd probably go more yellow and pink. And obviously, if you're using it for a short kit, it'll power up a little bit quicker than if you're using it for a long kit. So pink in a short kit is ever so slightly different to pink in a long kit. Let's have a look through here. Got quite a few. Christian Jones, the next Andy Bennett, Harry Divisa says. It does remind me of himself, to be fair. I like the way he's fishing at the minute, the way he fishes. He is a cracking little angler. In videos, I normally see you using hydro elastic. Do you also use hybrid elastic, and why do you prefer one over another? That's from Yuri. I've actually got some hybrids. So I've got some Daiwa hybrid in my pole at the minute, which I use for silvers. I think solids are better than hollows in the winter because obviously, say like today, -3 here in the UK, it's going to be really, really cold. Your hollow elastics can play up a little bit, whereas solids, it still affects them slightly, but nowhere near as bad as hollow. But I just think with hollow, especially hydro, having a liquid inside, your elastic doesn't flatten. Your elastic, I think, powers up a lot better. I've tried hybrids in the summer, and some of them are brilliant, some of them not. They're very inconsistent. Whereas with hydro, I've probably used it for 20 years, and literally, I know exactly what I can do with it. So for me, there's no need to change. It's a brilliant elastic. Obviously, people, you know, they're going about the cost and stuff like that. Some hybrids are half the price. If you're thinking about price point, you know, there is some hybrids that are really good. But they're a bit inconsistent for me. You know, certain companies, some are good, some are bad. Some are good, some are bad. So it's just picking the best of everything. With hydro, I've just always been able to use the range from top to bottom. I've never had a problem with it. But I have actually got some yellow Daiwa hybrid, so the solid stuff, in for my silvers. And it's very close to the Preston 5 slip, which I've also got some of that in for my silvers as well. And I play about with both of them for my silverfish fishing. So they're both very similar. I think they're like 0.8 mil or something like that. But yeah, they both probably play the part. I'm just a big hydro lover. Let me scroll back down. Oh, gone well too far. So I fished a Silvers League on gold at Partridge when it was warmer, and I'm back on Sunday when it's a lot colder. Should I change out or carry on what I was doing when it was warm? Craig Parnell, no, definitely don't do what you was doing when it was warm. Now, I would play it cautiously. You're probably going to be fishing for roach and skimmers, so maybe have a short line where you can loose feed some casters. If you can't get bites on casters, try loose feeding some maggots. Just try and catch, even if you're catching little fish, they will bring in the better fish. You will catch a better stamp on caster, but if you ain't getting a bite, it's because that stamp of fish might not be in your peg. So switch to maggots, start getting some bites off little fish, and you can always wean them back onto casters later in the day. So I would say on your short line, just loose feed that for roach. You're not going to catch lots of skimmers there. So just loose feed maggots or casters short. And then if you're going to put a skimmer line in long, you probably want a little bit of ground bait. Just don't put much bait in your ground bait. Worms, probably wouldn't start with worms. Just go with more baits like an odd dead maggot, an odd dead pinky, a little bit of ground bait. And when I say an odd dead maggot, odd dead pinky, I literally mean like, I always like to measure my bait. I'll probably put 25 mil of each in, maybe not even that, maybe 25 mil of bait, literally. So the 100 mil guru pot, quarter fill it with maggots and pinkies, and put that to about 3 pints of ground bait, and that should do you throughout the day. If you're not catching, you can put a bit of chopped worm in, and when you top up, put a bit of worm in, see if you get a response. If it's not working, you've got nothing to lose. But what I would say is just be very, very cautious, especially with skimmers. They don't like a lot of bait. So watch what you're doing when you're topping that up. Lead lamb, is there any way to apply shot without flattening the main line? I remember seeing a video years ago. I flattened my main line a little bit, but I remember seeing a video years ago that Alan Scott done. It might be on YouTube. And what he used to do is put the shot on, like really tight, and then he would slide it up his line and then get rid of this line. So where he first put it on, it was damaged, obviously. He'd slide it up, and then he'd pinch it in place a little bit more gentle. And that way, where he was applying it all here, he'd then chop it off, do his knot, and then he'd position his shots. It should be somewhere on YouTube. I've seen it before. It might be a Drennan video or something like that. But other than that, I don't really know, really. Just try and put them on. Try and use a softer shot. You know, some shots are hard. People like hard shots because they stay in position better. But obviously, they damage your line a little bit more. I would just say use a softer shot. I'll try and find a softer shot. Is the Aventus 700 better for bigger carp, Mark Jarvis? No, not at all. I've got a 9 and a 7. The 7's just a lower grade of carbon. So if I'm right, it's 7 or 70 ton or something like that. So it might be 7 ton or 70 ton carbon. The 900 is obviously 9 or 90 ton carbon, whichever way it is. 900 is just a better grade of carbon. The 7 might be a little bit more durable. You know, it might have a little bit more resin in. I'm not technically up to scratch with it. But obviously the 900 better performance. I would say they're both absolutely fine for carp. I won't have any problems whatsoever using, well, I do use my 900 for pretty much everything. It's just a lower price point because you just, you know, the materials are not as good as the 900, but it wouldn't bother me fishing for big carp with my 900. Not, well, I have done. Don't make a difference. Can we look forward to another Ringer versus Bennett in 2023, Darryl Matthews? No, we're not doing another because Ringer was scared. He knows he got lucky on the last 4. He doesn't want to give me a chance to claw it back. You know, he fluked a big perch at Tamar, beat me by ounces at Partridge. So I wanted revenge, but he bottled it, mate. No, he hasn't really. We're just not doing them this year. What do you think of RW floats? I've used RW floats for years. Really good floats. There's a lot of good handmade floats nowadays. It's just the problem is getting them for a lot of people. But yeah, quality floats, can't grumble. Let's have a look further down here. What is the perfect high under Jack? Do you think Paul used that one? Sorry about my finger, guys. Any plans of micros or ground bait? Alright, Bagger, what would you ever... Alright, Bagger, Kyle Clapham. Right, Bagger, would you ever put 2 lines in for silvers at Braddy's at 13 metres left and right? One with pellets, one with ground bait and loose feed. If so, how far apart would you put them? The only lake I'd probably ever do that on is Lake 2. Because you've probably got the space on the pegs to do it. The league we fish, it's every single pegging, so you haven't got the space to do it. So all you'd be doing is, in essence, if you think about it, it'd be like 4 people fishing in 3 pegs. And I personally hate it when somebody does it next to me because all you're doing is cutting off your space. Personally, on Lake 3 and 4, you don't need to. Just feed a bit of ground bait and that's how you'll catch the skimmers. pellets only really work on lake 2, and then you can put 2 lines where you've got a bit more room, a bit more water, then you can experiment. But if you haven't got that water, don't go sort of putting lines towards the next anglers either side of you, because all you're doing, like say, you're cutting off your space, and you'll end up, it's sort of like 4 people fishing in the space of 3 pegs, and if they do it, it's like 6 people fishing in the space of 3 pegs. So I think it depends on the space you've got. Do you think Martin Jennings is a drawbag, Luke Brennan? Yeah, he had £112 weekend, absolutely smashed the match, didn't he? So he must have drawn the best peg in the world, because I've seen Martin fish, and I think that's his personal best weight. Only kidding, Martin, I know you're watching. Ken Mainwright, had a great lesson with you a couple of years ago, and you recommended I use a short fork with my Arity pole. Would you still recommend a short fork with the AZ Pro? I would recommend a short fork for any pole. The downside to a short floor is you lose distance, but where that's not an issue, so for example me, I use a short fork for literally everything. It stiffens up your pole, makes it more responsive. It's easier if you're fishing with short kits, because you can actually break off at your short fork and net fish, and it's the same length as a normal top kit. So if I'm fishing down the track for F1s or slightly deeper water, I will basically break off at my top at my short fork, lift up, net the fish. If I'm fishing across, I just break off at my short free. But like I said, the only downside to it is you lose distance. But to be honest, I'd rather stick a dolly butt up the back of my pole and fish with a short four than not do. Is Mikey Williams doing a question answer? If so, are subtitles available? No, he won't do one. He's scared, mate. Probably. I don't know if we're going to be sharing these lives or whether I'll just end up doing them all. A lot of the gurus are very shy. They don't like doing stuff like this. There's only Ringo who's man enough to do it. Let's have a look. Hi Andy. Would you look into, what do you look for in a silverfish ground bait? If I'm fishing for skimmers, I want something that's really inert. So for example, I've just designed a ground bait for Blake's. It's more suited to roach. So it's got things like breadcrumb, coriander, crushed hemp, things like that in. Quite an active mix. Roach like that activity. It brings them in your peg. You've got little particles coming off it, floating up, and that will draw the fish in, and then hopefully they follow it down to your bait. For skimmers, you just want them all pinned to the bottom. Like you could potentially catch roach shallow over your ground bait, stuff like that. You can catch them on the bottom. But when it comes to skimmer fishing, I just want a totally dead mix. So I pretty much use crushed expander for everything. And then I'll add something to darken it off. So when it's if the water's coloured, I don't mind just using crushed expander on its own. If it's not coloured, then I'll darken it off with something. If I feel like it's roach and skimmers, then you might want something a little bit sweeter. If it's just skimmers, you can't really go wrong with like crushed pellet based mixes. You know, like the pole mix that I use for most of my fishing in the summer, it wouldn't bother me using it in the winter, because I know exactly what's in that mix. But what I would probably do is probably tone it down with a bit of crushed expander, just so it's not as fish mealy. Because fish meal, skimmers do love it, but sometimes when it's really, really cold, I think too much of anything can put things off, you know what I mean? We all like salt and vinegar, but you put too much on, you ruin it. So little things like that, it's just trial and error. Depends on the venue you're going to as well, and what size the skimmers are. If they're small fish, you don't want something, you know, the small sort of palm size skimmers, you don't want something really, really strong. But if you're fishing for bream, you know, a stronger mix might actually work better. Best float for skimmers. We've got some floats coming, to be honest, and our natural rain that Matt Godfrey designed. It's sort of like that typical pear-shaped, roundish float. That's sort of like the thing you're looking for, shape-wise. Slim floats are good if it's not too deep as well. But the biggest thing for skimmer fishing for me, especially in the winter, is the bristle that it has. So we've got fibre bristles on some of these. Like hollow bristles are great for seeing. The problem with hollow is obviously it's got air in it, so they're very buoyant. And sometimes you'll be fishing away and you'll see it, and this applies to a lot of your F1 fishing and other fishing as well. if you fish for silvers, your float, it'll take ages to go under it. Your bite will take ages to develop. And that's the fish got hold of your bait, and basically you're waiting for your bite to develop, and then you strike and it's on. If you fish a finer bristle, that float will just sail under dead easy. So a solid plastic is really good because it's, say, a 1 mil solid plastic bristle. There's no air in the bristle, so basically the downside to solid plastic bristles is they're hard to shut up. So there's pros and cons for everything. This is why you have all different patterns of float, all different bristles, all different thicknesses of bristles, stuff like that. But say a standard F1 float or standard float would be like a 1.5 mil hollow tip bristle. Now that's great for spring, autumn, summer, even winter if you're F1 fishing to an extent. But if you want to take it to the next level and you want a float that's a little bit more delicate, you want the bristle is the thing you got to think about the most. So using like a 1 mil or 1.2 mil fibre bristle, or a solid plastic bristle will show up a lot more of them little tiny indications that you see your fish messing with your bait, and then eventually it'll slide under. Probably had it in its mouth for like 5-10 seconds. Your float was just not showing it up. So skimmer floats, again, it depends. If it's shallow, a slim pattern float could be good, or like a rugby ball pattern float. If it's a little bit deeper, then you want a bit more body, because obviously the water's probably going to move about a little bit more. And then stem choice, I love carbon. If I can fish with carbon, I would go for carbon. But if I need stability, then obviously wire's better. So it's picking, if you're fishing big lakes and stuff like that, I would say you probably want a wire stem float, just because your float might be bouncing in the big waves and stuff like that. But if you're fishing a 4 foot deep lake and there's no wind, no tow, no skim, a little delicate thin float could just be as good. But think about your bristle choice, because that's really important. Andy Pearson, hi mate, how do you prepare your Blake's formal expanders? I can't seem to get them right. Let your expander just do its own thing. So basically, really cold water in the tap, get it as cold as you possibly can. Put your pellets in a little bag, and then just cover them with water, just enough water to cover the pellets. Tie it in a knot, chuck it in the fridge. And then when you get up in the morning, they'll take like 2 or 3 hours in the fridge to absorb all the water. And then basically when you get to your peg in the morning, get your tub, bait tub, fill it with water, and just pour half of them pellets into the water. All your pellets then will float to the surface, and that's fine. You don't want to pump them this time of year. When you pump a pellet, it basically loosens all the fibres in it, and it makes it go softer and mushier. So try not to pump them. Just put them in a bowl of water, and when you get to your peg, if you take like a 16's F1 pellet, for example, will sink most 4 mil expanders. If it doesn't, you just get your pellet, put it under the water ever so slightly, a gentle squeeze, and just replace the air with water. So squeeze it under the water, don't squeeze it in the air. Place it under the water, a little gentle squeeze, and it'll sink every time then. I don't like pumping my pellets in the winter for the simple fact you're adding more weight to your hook, and it's just anything that's lighter is easier for the fish to suck in. So by having it where it weighs as natural as possible, or as light as it possibly can be, by not pumping them, it's going to be a lot easier for the fish to suck it up, and your bites will probably develop a little bit quicker as well. As very similar to using like a wafter and a boilie. They're exactly the same product, except one floats and the hook counterbalances it, whereas the other one is sinking and they've got to suck. There's a reason why wafters are so much better than boilies in the winter and in the summer. It's all to do with the weight of your hook bait. So just don't pump them, whack them in a bag, and you should be fine. Where did you get your hair done? A barracks. Lee, stop it. You're always trying to take the mick out of me. He has actually butchered my hair, hasn't he? I went to the Turks today because he had a funeral this morning. John Holt funeral today. Just say he'd been missed by many people. Holty will. I'm sure loads of people who are watching this will know Holty. So rest in peace, mate. But yeah, I had to go and get it done by the Turks this morning, and he's butchered it. I think he was the apprentice to something. So let me scroll back down. Hi Andy, have you ever thought or been tempted to fish for England? That's by Sav Monango. Not really, Sav. One, I'm not good enough because I don't do that style of fishing, and them boys are next level. Takes years of dedication. I'd need to get into a team and go down that route. when I was younger, I did get offered some trials for England when I was about 15 or 16 by Dennis White to go and fish with Barnsley lads when I was like literally 16-year-old up at Fleece Dam. But was actually going white acres the day after, so nothing ever come of it. If I'd have gone to that trial, then who knows, I may have continued down that path. But be honest, mate, I would literally rather try and win the big money finals. And once you've won one and you realise you can do it, it sort of gives you the buzz. So, if I could win another couple of them in the next few years, 10 years, whatever, chance to change my life. Whereas fishing for England, it's a lot of hard work, dedication, and their own money. Do you know what I mean? I take me hat off to the lads who do it, but no, one ain't good enough, and two, I'm not really that interested in it. Right, let's have a look. Alright, Bagger. Any views on Corder's goo type and answers on your bait, Jamie M? I don't use any flavourings whatsoever really. I know flavourings work, 100% they work, but I couldn't tell you what flavourings work. And I've not done enough testing or enough underwater testing until somebody proves me wrong. I think basically all flavouring, all baits have their own natural flavourings. Meat's got its own flavour, corn, worms, pellets. They've all got their own flavourings to me. So why would you want, if they like pellets, why would I want to flavour it with sort of strawberry or something like that? But I know for a fact it does work, and fish home in on certain things. But I don't know what they like and what they don't. So to me, unless I had enough time to go and spend and test, right, these fish on this venue love strawberry. Every time I put strawberry on, I catch a fish. If you find something like that, great. But I've never actually used goo that much. I know Ringer uses it quite a bit, but I think that suits his style of fishing, where he's feeder fishing a lot. Pole fishing, I never really use it, to be honest. Niall Evans, what's your plan of attack for silvers on Braddies at Lake 4? Well, the other day I fished purely just for skimmers. So if I'm fishing for skimmers, the biggest thing on there is when you fish for skimmers, you don't want to be loose feeding. If you're loose feeding, you get lots of activity from roach and ide and stuff like that, and the skimmers just won't settle. They don't like fish buzzing about the peg all the time. So you've got to just pot bait, sit and wait, and be patient, and eventually the skimmers will find your ground bait and you'll start picking them off, and then you can top up accordingly. When I fished for skimmers long the other day, the problem is I had F1s coming in my peg and they were just sitting over my bait. I didn't feed for like 2 hours, went in, caught two F1s, then I caught three skimmers. Every time you top up, F1s are back in your peg. By loose feeding, you can catch roach and ide, and you can fish off the bottom and try and avoid the F1s. So my typical plan on there, what I should have done the other day, like the other day I went at £29, Lee Riley won the match with £30. I was actually on a better peg, but I tried to just fish for skimmers alone, and I caught nothing on my long line. My normal approach, I know for a fact I could have caught another £5 if I'd have filled the gaps up. And I would normally fish like maggots or casters shallow, up and down long, catch roach, catch ide, and then my short line, I would catch loose feeding to start with, and then when the roach and the ide sort of fizzle out or my roach go really small, then I would sort of turn that line into skimmers. The skimmers typically feed later on better anyway, so it's a case of knowing the areas, because the skimmers are not everywhere. The more at the top end where it's a little bit wider, and then feeling like if I'm catching roach quick enough, why would I come off them? Or if I'm catching ide, why would I come off them to try and target skimmers? So when I went the other day, that was my plan, to see if I could catch enough fishing for skimmers. And I drew a really good peg, and it still weren't good enough. So my normal approach would be long up and down on the bottom and shallow, loose feeding. Loose feed short to start with, maggots or casters. Sometimes casters is good if you've got the little dumpy roach in your peg. If you haven't and you're just catching small fish, sometimes maggots is better. The key to Bradshaws is just basically try and keep putting fish in the net. No matter how big they are, keep putting them in your net. And when the stamp fish come in your peg, you will catch them. When they're not in your peg, you've got to fill the gaps. You can sit there and cast her and think there's not a fish in your peg. Start throwing maggots in. Within 5 feet, you'll start getting bites straight away. Hi Andy, what's your best advice for someone that's been match fishing for a couple of years, started winning club matches now and winning opens? What's the next step? Um, Nathan Bowen, that is. If you're winning opens, like there's probably about as high as you can get, really. The only other thing you could potentially challenge yourself at is doing some festivals, doing some of the bigger money qualifiers, stuff like that. I'll go into maybe some of the opens where you're fishing, places like Lindholm where you've got a really good standard angler, where you're gonna have top anglers there every week. Partridge got a really good standard. Herringbrook, I don't know where you're based like, but if you fish them type of venues and you start winning there, you're competing against the top lads who win the festivals and the big money matches then. So all of a sudden, you're capable yourself, you might as well get entered. Right, let's have a look. Hi Andy, where is your best place to get your maggots from? Andrew Pearson. The best bait I've ever had is Lane's bait, but it's a bit too far for me on a weekly basis. So, to be honest, I sort of get maggots from here, there, and everywhere. Dave's a middle, which does really good bait, but again, it's just a little bit too far for me. Most of my bait comes from Partridge just because that's normally where I would go. But if I don't go to Partridge, if I'm going somewhere like Bradshaw's, I generally get someone to pick it up, and it'll either come from like Fisherman's Way in Bury or Tongmore Angling. That's where my bait will come from. I tell you, give me some really good bait the other day as well. Edgley Sports did some awesome casters the other day. Connor went in there and got some bait, and he gave me his leftover casters, and they was really good caster. But I don't actually have a tackle shop that I go to regular. I get them from here, there, and everywhere. In the summer, most of my bait's from Partridge, because it's easy and convenient for me. I can't get to a shop in the morning or afterwards, so I just buy it at the fishery. But best bait I've ever had by a mile is definitely Lanes, especially the maggots. They're absolutely massive. Do you ever dob bread in open water? If so, how does your approach different from dobbing to features? Don't really. I sort of answered that at the start, Peter, but it don't really differ anything. Dobbing bread is just sort of trying to find the depth the fish are at, but the most important thing is finding the location where they are. If they're in deep water, if they're in cover, it won't bother me dobbing in deep water. If I was on a big open lake, it's a little bit different. If the lake lends itself to fishing like bomb and waggler, you probably find you won't dob them on the pole because the fish will just sit out of range. So you've got to know where the fish are to start with. If you felt a big ball of fish at 40.5 metres in an open water lake, though, it won't bother me one bit trying to dob them. The problem is they probably just back off out of range, and you'd end up having to chuck a waggler half depth or popping bread up off the bottom, something like that. Andy, do you keep a log of all your matches on venues, or is it still all in your head? I used to, Neil. I did a season where I kept track of everything, but no, I don't now really, because of things like Facebook and stuff now. Basically my angling page on Facebook, Andy Bennett Angling, as I can scroll back through there and look, I can type in maybe December 10th, something like that, or things pop up daily on my Facebook, like last year or 3 years ago, and I might have won a match or something. It'll pop up, so I can sort of look back through Facebook for that. To be honest, nowadays. Is it viable to use expanders shallow, deep, similar to how you fish maggots for F1s in 3 to 4 foot of water? If so, what? If so, what the approach to loose feed with expanders this way? Loose feed and expanders, really, I've only ever known it good for skimmers. So, like, I did a video, if you've seen it on YouTube the other week, up at Bradshaw Hall, feeding a few micro pellets because it's quite a deep venue, and you're trying to catch sort of the better stamp of skimmers. You can sort of switch them on to loose fed expanders, 4 mils, and that can be really good. But then you can go to another venue and you loose feed expanders and the stamp's not good enough, or you've not got enough fish in your peg, and it'd be the absolute kiss of death, in which case you go back to maggot and ground bait. I did try a few years ago loose feeding expanders down the middle at Partridge. I'm sure I was doing a feature with Matt or somebody like that, because they never really used to eat meat very well there, and I thought, well, they love pellets, let's try loose feeding some expanders, and I caught absolutely nothing on it. It was weird because 4mm hard pellets would have been better. You know, it's more about the noise then. Obviously, expanders as well, they don't break down, so you can end up with quite a lot of bait on the bottom. So just be careful with expanders. They're great if they're getting picked up by the skimmers, but for carp fishing, I've never really seen, you know, I think hard pellets are better because they make more noise, and that's what attracts them. What hook length would you use when on bomb and bread? If I was F1 fishing, I'd probably fish like 015 to 14's QM1, something like that. If I was carp fishing, I'd probably use 019 to 14's or 12's QM1, and I'd probably fish like 8mm or 10mm, depending how big the fish are, and probably put 2 to 3 discs on, and use a little speed stop just to lock them in place. And I'd probably fish hook length wise, start at 12 inches, and then you can have a shot on your hook length and try and pin it down that way, or you can just shot on your hook length. Hi Andy, what is the best 13-metre pole around? 450 quid, Mark Heath. Honestly, Mark, I wouldn't know, mate. I'm not clued up on my stuff like that. The best thing to do there is probably go to one of your local tackle shops, who's got a pole alley, something like that, something like Lead Tackle, or somewhere, I don't know anywhere else that's got pole alley. Wickersley Angling, I think, have. But yeah, go to something like that. Go and have a look in one of the shops, and you'll probably find there'll be a few that you can test and look at, and just see what's best for you, really. But I wouldn't know what's in the range. Obviously, Guru don't have one at that price point yet. We probably will do in the future, but at the minute we don't. So I don't even know if Dyer will sell them at that price point. They will do probably, but I don't know what they are. So I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. Hi Andy, out of all the other gurus, who have you learnt the most off? They're all rubbish, really. There's only me who's any good. None of them. No, I don't know really. Matt Godfrey is unbelievable at silverfish fishing. Every time I go out with him, I learn from him. Ringer's very intense and he's got a lot of knowledge. I've learnt a lot off Steve and Matt. Even Frankie is not that bad of an angler. Learnt a bit off Rooney in the early days, method feeder fishing. Mikey Williams he likes to fish very light and stuff like that. Obviously I fish with Connor regular. I think you just pick bits up off everybody. You know, there's no one. I've learnt a lot. Paul Holland would be by far the person I've learnt the most off, actually. Paul's taught me a lot about waggler fishing, and he fishes different to me as well. Like, Paul would definitely be the one I've learnt from, but silverfish fishing wise, Matt plays it down, but he's very, very well. He's one of the best anglers in the world, if not in the top 10 maybe now. Do you know what I mean? In the actual world, definitely. Me personally, I'd put him right up there, just behind Will, in the England setup. I think he's that good, but he plays it down, Matt. But yeah, he's awesome. I've learnt a lot from him. But yeah, by far it would be Paul overall. He's taught me a lot about a lot of different things. But you can only learn by speaking to other people, and everyone will have their own little idea. And you just take little snippets of knowledge. If you don't agree with it, I don't agree with a lot of stuff that Paul says. He don't agree with a lot of stuff I say. But between us, we bounce off each other and learn a lot. So when I was fishing with him a lot down at Tunnel and things like that, still fishing with him a lot now, but not weekly. You know, I might not fish with Paul now till March time, something like that. But when we was going on a lot of the festivals together, especially in the summer, you know, we'll both have different ways of doing it. But he'll have his own way that he likes to fish, and I'll have my way that I like to fish. And if I tell him to do this, he doesn't like doing it. He likes to do his own thing. He basically just likes to spray and pray. Spray maggots everywhere and hope for the best. That's Paul. No, I'm joking. Hi Andy, hook wide. There's 3 types of hook eye. Turned towards the point, backwards and straight. Which would you use for what situation? Hook wise, there's 3 types of hook hide. Turned towards the point. Yeah, so like in turned, backwards and straight. What would you use for the situation? I don't like the backwards one, like the old PR36s, I think they was. I've never liked that style. I don't like them turned in either. I say I don't like them turned in. Like the SLWGs, MWGs, QM1s, I think they're all straight. You've caught me off guard a little bit there. I don't know if they actually are interned at all, but I think they're straight. I would just go for straight. I'm trying to think now if they're interned. You've got me thinking. I would say whatever the SLWG is, that to me is like the perfect eye duck. That's what I'd be looking for. Do you watch any other YouTube fishing shows? If so, which one? I watch a bit of Winning Ways stuff. Obviously, I subscribe to Match Focus and I do live on Match Focus for Paul every month and do a live match for him. Winning Ways, like I said. But yeah, I watch loads of fishing stuff when I get time. I just love watching fishing, picking bits up, seeing what people's opinions are. Don't agree with them a lot of the time. There's a lot of rubbish talked, but if you can sift through it, there's always little gems of information on there. So yeah, I watch a bit of all sorts, to be honest. How would you approach a match at Herringbrook in January and February? Great live feed, Nathan Davis. Cheers, Nathan. How would I approach a match at Herringbrook? I haven't been there for ages, to be honest. It's changed a lot since I've been. I know Christian's been going, and I was talking to him the other week. He went on Island Pool and had £190 the other week on hard pellets, and he caught some shallow on hard pellets. So, to be honest, when he said, I'm going to fish hard pellets, I was like, you're mad, you won't get a bite. And then he's had £190. And he said, well, hard pellets have been really good. They're not catching on maggots as much as they used to be. So it's obviously changed a lot since I last went, because it was all a lot of maggot fishing. But I know they catch on bomb and bread, chucking a waggler to the far bank on that match lake. You can catch some carp doing that. Long pole with maggots, short pole with maggots. Maggot feeder when it goes really cold can be good on there. And then on the canals, dobbing bread, and then maggots fishing across, tapping a few maggots in, fishing down the middle. Again, just sparingly feeding maggots. But he just keeps ramming fish in there, doesn't he? So the fishing's absolutely awesome. They're still catching £100 now. So there's probably twice as many fishing as when I used to go. And it was awesome back then. So I need to make my way down there again at some point, because the fishing's really good at the minute there. But I would say maggots. Maggots and bread, F1 carp fishing, you ain't going to go a million miles wrong. But just try and see if they're still catching on pellets, because he keeps putting new stockfish in. You might catch on pellets all winter there. Hi Andy, out of all the guff gurus, I've just read that. Hi Andy, what's your best advice? Someone think. Well done Andy, glad you went to Holly's do. Yeah, it was a good do, he had a good send off. Everyone loved Holly, so sad day, but it is what it is. Do you have Cullio expanders, Barry Smith? No, Barry. I've tried it in the past, and I tried it on the perfect day. I went to Parsh's once, drew an absolute flyer, first one in about 20 years, and I caught a fisher chuck on pellets, and I did some red pellets with food colouring, some yellow pellets with food colouring, and a natural pellet, and there was catching a lot of fish on red maggots at the time, and I could not get a bite on a red pellet on the hook, a red expander. If I put a yellow on, I'd catch an odd un, but natural was by far the best colour. And it weren't a coincidence. I kept trying it, and I had £147 that day, so I knew there was tons of fish in my peg. It was the perfect day to experiment. And I just thought, red maggot's the best duck bait. So why am I not trying a red pellet? Put it on, absolutely rubbish. So colour makes a massive difference when you're fishing. I tried a wire bristle at Lindholm last week and found in comparison to a solid plastic that the bites were a lot more positive. Yeah, wire bristle will be really positive because there's so little resistance. The problem, Jeffrey, is obviously shotting them up. You know, wire is like just really, really hard to shot up, but where you can fish a lighter, finer bristle, you'll 100% get more bites. Right, God, I've been going over an hour already. Try and do a couple more. Let's have a look. Oh, sorry about my finger. How would you approach Bradshaw's Lake 3 for silvers? Lake 3 is not as deep as 4, but you will still catch shallow. So Lake 3, there's a lot of small roach in there. So I always find maggots is really good on that lake. Lake 4, you can catch better on casters, but I always find maggots is a safe option. Maggots, just I always put some ground bait in to start with, and what I always do on there is put a little nugget in short, just a little tiny nugget like that, just to get the fish in my peg straight away, and then I start loose feeding maggots there. I'll try and catch a quick 15-20 roach on that, so maybe a couple of pound. If I don't get a bite on it, what I'm doing is just letting my long line settle, and after about 20 minutes, I can drop on my long line where I've potted in probably 1 or 2 balls of ground bait with an odd worm in it, and maybe a very odd caster, and I can sometimes go in and catch skimmers. And like the other week, I had a real good run of skimmers the first, and then two things will happen: either you top up and you carry on catching, or you top up and you start getting an odd F1. If that happens, then I start loose feeding. I try and catch hide and roach shallow, but because it's only 4 foot deep, you can actually catch them really shallow, like 18 inches, 14 inches deep sometimes. So I'll do that, and then it's just a case of alternating and keep putting fish in the net. If you've got the room, so if you're on say like 10, 14, 26, 1, 5, sometimes I just like to have a dedicated skimmer line where I'll just feed ground bait for skimmers, and that can be a good resting line, but you need to be putting fish in the net regularly. You need to be loose feeding, and sometimes you feel like you're going nowhere with these. I did it the other week, roach from like half an ounce to 2 ounce, and you think I'm going nowhere here. Come the end of match, I had like 25-12 or something on Saturday, and I just felt like I'm never going to catch a weight doing this. But £25 at the end of the day, it was a brilliant one. When are you doing your next live match? When are you doing next match focus live match? I'm pretty sure we're booked in for the 19th. Oh, where's the comments? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 19th we're booked in for, David. Might be less than that actually. It's definitely within the next week or two. Morning, Gareth. Hi mate, when you're at Partridge, how long would you dob for before changing? Dobbing's one of them things, you've got to be careful that you don't sit there and waste too much time. So if I haven't had a bite dobbing after 40 minutes, I'm going to start tapping some bait in. Like, sometimes you've got to give it time, but again, you're not feeding, you're not controlling your peg when you're dobbing. So if they're not there, they ain't just going to miraculously turn up. You've got to go and find them. 19th might be hungover, it's coming home. Yeah, that's the problem. I think that might be a different day. I'm not sure, but I've got something booked in for the 19th. When you're dobbing, you're basically not controlling your peg. You're not feeding anything. So if 30-40 minutes has passed and I haven't had a bite on bread, I can't just sit there doing nothing. I need to start feeding. But if I've nicked 1 or 2 early fish and nobody's catching, or nobody's had a bite feeding yet, they've tapped a few maggots in and they've had 1 fish or something like that, I'm not in no rush to feed either. So it depends whether you're falling behind or not. Look around, keep an eye on other people, but don't sit there for 2 hours feeding nothing, because you're not making nothing happen. If you're on fish, great, you can carry on dobbing, and right, there's some here, I just got to keep at it. But if you're not, get some bait in, try and drag some fish into your spot. Are you going to Munkall over the winter, Andy, on any opens, Jason Jones? I'd love to, mate, but it's just a little bit too far. I've only been that once for Gary's festival. I'm probably gonna do both of them festivals next year there. Awesome venue, but for an open, it's a bit 2 hours 20 minutes, a little bit too far for me to go. There's loads of venues I'd like to go to, but they're too far, a lot of them. I've got so much good fishing on my doorstep, like Bradshaw's and Partridge Winter Leagues. We're a bit spoilt really, especially for the silvers. Screttings or coppins from micros on the pole and feeder only. I'm a big screttings man. I use screttings for all my micros, and then coppins for all my 4, 6 and 8 mils. The only time I'd use a scretting 4 mil is if I was fishing shallow for F1s, because they sink a little bit slower. But other than that, coppins 4 to 8 mils, and then scretting micros. When you say fish up and down, how do you work out up? How do you work out up the depth, etc.? How do you work out up the depth, etc.? Graham Buckley. I think what you mean is how do you work? Yeah, so how do I work out up and down? So basically, I'll fish on the bottom. So when I'm lake free, for example, fishing up and down, it's 4 foot deep, so I'll have a rig on the bottom, and then I like to have a rig that I can fish half depth and above. So if the fish are coming up to intercept the bait, a bit like F1 fishing, if they're coming up to intercept the bait, I can catch them like that, you know, as they're grabbing the bait as it falls, which is generally all done above half depth. And then if they're not and they're following the bait down, they're generally going to swim straight down to the bottom, in which case I'll just fish on the bottom for them. You can sometimes catch roach and skimmers fishing just off the bottom. F1s and carp, not as much when you're feeding. They're generally going down and they go down to the bottom. But if I was on Lake 4, what you generally tend to find is it's 7, 8 foot deep, but as soon as you go deeper than 2.5, 3 foot, you miss too many bites from the roach. Like if you're gonna do a weight of roach on there, it's generally about 18 inches to 3 foot deep, or on the bottom. So I don't really fish like 4, 5, 6 foot deep. You know, it's got to be sort of the top half layer, or I fish hard on the bottom. Andy, I'm Dave Higson. I bought some micros. When I put them in water, they went white. Did I get the wrong one? Yeah, you probably got some copping pellets there. The whiteness is probably the oil or something that are on them. Coppings are a lot more oily than scrains, so yeah, you probably got the wrong ones, Dave. Do you ever pop bread up on the bomb for arc? Yeah, definitely. Like if the fish are out of range of the pole, but they're sat off the bottom, you've two options. If it's windy, you can't sometimes fish a waggler, so therefore bomb and bread is the only way to pop your bait up off the bottom. Sometimes you could pop it up a foot to 3 foot. Just depends how deep the venue is. 12 inches, bomb and bread, 12 to 15 inches popped up. Yeah, like loads of times I've caught doing that. Right. I'll try and find another thing. I'll do 2 more questions and then we'll call it a night. We'll keep doing these like sort of every couple of weeks. What rig would you use down the track for F1 maggot, and how do you stop foul looking them in that last hour when they turn up down the track? Rig wise, dead simple. 4x12 flow for partridge. Most of it is about. I know you're on about partridge, so it's about 4.5, 5 foot deep. I would be fishing 4x12s if it's really, really windy, like 4x14s, 0.4 of a gram, something like that. You don't want to go any heavier than that, really. So quite a lightish rig. Bulk and 2 droppers. I would fish with probably a 5-inch hook length, and I'd have my shot sort of just above that. So I'd have 6 inches from the hook or 5 inches from the hook. Then I'd have another one the same distance, and then I'd have my bulk the same distance plus a little bit above that. So my bulk, say I was going 5, 5, so a shot at 5 inch, another shot at 5 inch, my bulk would be 6 inches above that. If it was a little bit deeper, say 6 foot, I'd go 6 inch, 6 inch, and then my bulk would be 7 inch above that. And basically, if you want a slower fall, just fish a lighter rig. And on there, what will happen is the fish will sit beyond your bait a lot of the time. So flick your rig past where you're fishing and let it fall in on an arc. That way, anything that's sat just beyond your bait by 2 or 3 foot, the bait will come past them. Don't just drop your rig straight down in a heap. But if you do start foul looking fish, don't put your rig in like that. Just feed your bait, lower your bait right into the kill zone, and just lower it down like you would pellet fishing. And sometimes they'll be right on your bait, and that'll eliminate some foul lookers. If you're foul looking lots and lots of fish, experiment, try single maggot, double maggot, a maggot and a pinky on the hook. But generally it's through your feeding. You know, you might not be feeding enough. In the middle, you've got to feed a little bit more bait. So don't be tapping in like 6 and 8 maggots. Make sure you're feeding 15 to 25, 30 maggots. Because if they go down the track, they're going there for a reason, that's to eat. So a lot of the time, people will tap like 4 and 5 maggots in across and down the edges, and then they go down the middle and they do the same, and all that happens is you're not actually feeding enough bait to force the fish down, so you end up foul looking them. When am I going to propose? When I've got enough money. Where would you be feeding maggots on partridge if you have no fish dobbing? Bottom of the near, bottom of the near side and far side shelf, and how many would you be tapping in to start? I'm not going to answer that, Lee, because you took the mick out of my hair. How do skimmers and roach feed different? Roach love loose feed. You know, roach definitely like loose feed. They like to be buzzing about your peg. You've got a lot of um, fish coming in your peg, a lot of activity. So loose feed's really good for that. Whereas skimmers, they like to just sit in your peg and just graze and just pick little bits up. So ground bait is great for skimmers. Sometimes you'll find that roach back off the ground bait. They'll sit off the back of it. You know, they'll come to the ground bait, but then they sort of hover off the back of it. So it depends on the venue you're fishing. Sometimes, if you're putting bait in to catch a bit of both, you might catch skimmers and roach just off the back of your ground bait. Sometimes you catch the skimmers right on your ground bait, but most of my biggest weights this winter has probably been for roach, has probably been just loose feed, you know, just loose feeding maggots or casters. So I would say loose feed for roach, pots for skimmers, pot ground bait for skimmers. I'm only joking, Lee. I will answer it now. I see you laughing. Where would you be feeding maggots on partridge if you had no fish dobbing? Bottom of the near side and far side shelf. And how many would you tap in to start? I won't feed much bait, 6 or 8 maggots probably now, because you're talking like -3. The water cannot get any colder now. I was amazed yesterday that there's some cat ice on the lakes, and then all of a sudden today they just froze like that. So the water has probably hit rock bottom. I wouldn't like to guess, but if it's freezing at that, the water temperature must be somewhere like 3 to 5 degrees, like, well, probably 3 or 4 degrees for it to freeze like that. Someone did tell me once what it is. It might be 3.5 degrees, and then the water freezes. So the water temperature is really, really low. Obviously, last weekend, everywhere I took a knock because it went really cold. After a mildish spell, it's gone really cold and the fishing just stopped. This weekend, obviously, we're going to have ice on the lakes. It's probably might even fish a little bit better because the ice, it can't get any colder. The fish will get used to it, and the ice will give you a bit of cover. So don't be surprised if there is an odd half decent weight through the ice, to be honest. If not this weekend, maybe the middle of next week if the fish get used to it. But where would I feed? It depends where the fish are on the day. Are they in the shallow water? Are they in the deep water? I'd just, you know, typical lines at partridge, I'd fish 3 foot and 5 foot. I'm not a big lover of fishing in like 4 foot. So it'd be bottom of the far slope, bottom of the inside slope in the deeper water. And then I'd have one just on the knuckle of the shelf. So where it's just starting to come up before it drops off, I'd put a line right here. Don't worry about fishing up to the cover because most of the fish live in the middle. So you don't need to go right tight to the pallet. Just come to the edge of the shelf and before it drops off, just fish there right on the end bit. They'd probably be my 2 main lines. And then some days you'll catch nothing in the track. And some days you'll catch everything in shallow water. And other days you'll catch an odd one in shallow water and catch quite well in the track. So just depends, like if it's windy, if it's flat calm, if it's bright, sunny, you know, conditions play a massive part. So right, one more. Phil Hunt, what's your favourite elastic? Hydro, obviously that's what I've used for ages and years. So pretty much all different sizes of that. If I had to pick one elastic, orange is probably my most versatile. Paul Lehman Fishing, Andy, do you use fluorocarbon for hook lengths? No, Paul, pretty much 99% of my fishing is monofilament, just because it's a little bit more softer and supple. Right, see if I can find one more. When you say no, I've read that one. So, how would you start a silvers match on a freezing cold morning when you know it's going to be rock hard? If I know it's going to be rock hard, like I say, I'd put a bit of bait in terms of ground bait. You can one ball can sometimes be enough, especially on commercials. Like one ball is enough sometimes to get your peg started. So one sort of bit bigger than a golf ball, probably an orange. Let's say an orange. Maybe a bit less than an orange, maybe an apple, something like that. So probably like equivalent of 100 ml ground bait, maybe 150 ml ground bait when it's squeezed together in a ball. And then not much bait in it. You know, you don't have to go ramming it full of maggots, casters, worms, stuff like that. Just literally put a tiny little bit of bait in. You know, 25, 50 ml of bait. Take it really cautiously, really easy. And then you can always top up and let the fishing develop. You don't need to go ramming a load of bait in and hoping they turn up. Put a little bit in, get a bit of activity in your peg. You know, when it's good, you put a lot of ground bait in to start to try and hold the fish for longer. But when it's hard, you do that, the fish might not turn up over that for 2 hours because you put too much bait in. So little and often, you know, like start with one ball, feed it, see what response you get. If it's a real shallow venue, sometimes you can literally feed. You know, I went to Blundell's the other week on a silvers match, and I was feeding a little, probably probably the size of my little finger, like tiny little bits. Jamie did a video on it on Winning Ways website about feeding tiny amounts of bait and catching these little skimmers and stuff. I probably didn't feed as little as he did, but I still fed next to nothing. I reckon I fed, if I went like that with my hands, I wouldn't have fed that much bait all day, like literally ground bait wise. So I wouldn't have fed 2 full balls. I wouldn't have fed one full ball all day. I was just dropping little tiny blobs of stodgy ground bait in and just catching like 2 or 3 little skimmers off it. So if you're fishing for a low weight, sometimes feeding next to nothing can be brilliant. But if you want to kickstart your peg and just put 1 ball of ground bait in, the biggest thing I'll say is don't put many particles in. And then in terms of a roach line, just ping it with an odd maggot, you know, 6 maggots. Keep that bait trickling through. And eventually you'll start to get a few roach coming in your peg, and maybe the roach fishing will get better and better. But for skimmers, just very little bait, very little particles, and then you're not going to kill it for yourself. Right, that's it. I've been on an hour and 20 minutes. I'm going to call it a thingy there. Sorry if I didn't get through to your question. I think I got most of them done. But yeah, thanks for watching. Like I said, we're going to do a couple more of these. Well, we're going to do a few now into next year. I don't know if it'll just be myself or whether some of the other gurus will actually join in. But thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. We'll do another one. Cheers.